Since August 6th, the Ukrainian army has invaded Kursk Oblast of Russia and launched attacks in 5 directions. It has now occupied an area about 60 kilometers wide, 20 to 35 kilometers deep, and with a total area of more than 1,200 square kilometers. The Russian side calls this move of the Ukrainian army a terrorist attack rather than an invasion. The Russian army has not yet committed large-scale ground forces to launch a full-scale counterattack against the Ukrainian army that has entered the country. Instead, it is conducting a counterattack by combining half of its elite forces with half of its mobilized armed forces. The two sides have engaged in fierce confrontations in the airspace. The Ukrainian army is suspected of using F-16s to defend its own airspace. And the Russian Iskander missile has also dealt a heavy blow to the Ukrainian army at present. The Ukrainian army is trying to use the occupied area in Kursk Oblast as a bridgehead to expand its attack on Russian territory, while the Russian army continues to strengthen its attack in the eastern Ukraine direction, presenting a situation of you fight yours, and I fight mine. The Russian army is unwilling to give up the advance on the eastern Ukraine front because of the Ukrainian army in Kursk. But its offensive has inevitably slowed down. Whether the Ukrainian army can reduce its disadvantage in the previous war of attrition through the combat method of turning from interior lines to exterior lines remains to be further observed. On the morning of August 6th, about 10:00 Ukrainian troops from 5 or 6 brigades in motorized units invaded Kursk Oblast of Russia on a large scale from the border of Sumy Oblast in the north. Due to the weak military presence of the Russian army in this area, the Ukrainian army broke through the Russian border checkpoint on the same day and quickly advanced to the seat of the SUJA district government on the border of Kursk Oblast. More than 100 employees of the Federal Security Service station here either fled or waved white flags and surrendered. Subsequently, the Russian army, which had come to its senses, urgently mobilized the available ground forces at hand, dispatched the aerospace forces at the same time, and used artillery missiles and other means to block the Ukrainian army. The two sides engaged in firefights. The offensive momentum of the Ukrainian army slowed down somewhat, but it was still advancing gradually. The reinforcements of the Russian army mainly come from the Belgorod-Kharkov front, where they are in a confrontation nearby. The two sides mainly engage in fierce firefights on the east side of Sudyzha town. As for Suja town, the Ukrainian army spent several days eliminating a small number of resisting Russian troops. The rest of the one-year conscripts hid in warehouses and other places. For example, 100 to Russian infantrymen and Chechen armed personnel hid in an armory on the outskirts of Suja for several days, until a week later, when several soldiers of the Ukrainian special forces passed by and discovered them. Before they could even raise their guns, the people inside surrendered. These soldiers are from a motorized infantry company of the 18th Motorized Infantry Battalion of the 488th Motorized Infantry Regiment of Th. E 144th Motorized Infantry Division of the 20th Guards Army of the Moscow Military Region of the Russian Army and the Chechenek HMAT forces. This is a relatively large single surrender event of the Russian army since the Russia-Ukraine war. It can be said that basically an entire company surrendered collectively. Of course, the prisoners of war of the Ukrainian army are not limited to this. According to news, the Ukrainian army has captured at least more than 1,000 Russian officers, soldiers and public officials in this direction. So, is Ukraine invading Russia? In short, the Russian official did not call it an invasion, but called it a terrorist attack launched by the Ukrainian armed forces. The deputy director of the Russian military political administration used the term that the Ukrainian army entered Russia. Putin instructed the Russian army to carry out anti-terrorist operations locally and emphasized that the most urgent and important thing at present is that the Ukrainian army must be expelled from Russian territory immediately. At present, the Ukrainian army, which is regarded as terrorists by the Russian army, is taking Suja town as its base and launching attacks in 5 directions, trying to further expand the occupied area. It is advancing towards Balaya in the east and towards Velikaia Soly in the northeast. However, due to the fact that the Russian army has transferred about 5 to 7 battalion-sized combat groups in this direction, the progress in these 2 directions is relatively slow to the north. It points to Lgov along Kromsky Byki. To the northwest, it points to Rilsk along Koronivio. In these 2 directions, the Ukrainian army takes them as the main attack directions. The obvious goal is to advance to the E38 highway line between Rilsk and Lgov, so as to control a zone about 50 kilometers deep on Russian territory and pose a threat to Kursk. At present, Koronivio and Kolomoisky Buki have been surrounded, or semi-surrounded by the Ukrainian army. It is said that there are 1,000 or even 3,000 Russian defenders in Koronivio and they have been divided and surrounded to the southwest of Koronivio. There is a vast area belonging to GLSHK Overvy district, another border administrative unit of Russia. The Ukrainian army has also entered this area. Between this area and the rear of Russia, there are 3 bridges spanning the Seym River, located in 3 settlements of Zvano, GLSHK Overvy and Karezh respectively. On the 16th, the Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter jet dropped 2 precision-guided bombs provided by France and destroyed the bridge in Zvanoy village. On the 17th, it dealt a heavy blow to the 2nd bridge near GLSHK Overvy, making it impossible for military trucks to pass if Ukraine destroys all the remaining bridges. The Russian army from Tetkino on the border to Suja will be in a situation with no way out. Of course, it is reported that there are only 700 Russian troops in this area. If the Ukrainian army can occupy the south bank of the Seym River and defend along the river, the Ukrainian armed forces can occupy about 670 kilometers of territory, and there is also a possibility of capturing about 700 more Russian soldiers. The authorities of Kursk Oblast in Russia have issued an emergency evacuation order to all remaining civilians in GLSHK Overvy district. At the same time, the Ukrainian government allows foreign journalists to enter the occupied area of Kursk for interviews. Most of the residents of Suja have left, but at least 100 people have stayed. The Ukrainian army has provided food, drinking water and medical services to the remaining Russian residents. However, there are also local residents who enter stores on their own to take things. The Ukrainian army announced the establishment of a military administration in Kursk. One of the reasons is to stop such incidents. Judging from various sources of information, the number of Ukrainian troops entering Russian territory exceeds 12,000. They have controlled more than 80 settlements and occupied an area in Russia about 60 kilometers wide, 20 to 35 kilometers deep, and with a total area of more than 1,200 square kilometers. Kursk Oblast has an area of 30,000 square kilometers, and there are about 30 district secondary administrative units in total. On average, each district has an area of 1,000 square kilometers. Obviously, Ukraine's combat goal is to occupy the 2 districts of Suja and GLSHK Overvy, about 2,000 square kilometers of land. On the Russian side, there are also many pieces of newsworthy of attention. First of all, the designations of the reinforcement troops have been identified. Among them are 2 airborne battalions from Kherson and the 38th 64th Independent Motorized Brigade from Zaporizhzhia, which are troops from the stagnant front. There are also some troops from the hot battlefront on the eastern line, such as the 810th Independent Motorized Brigade. However, most of the troops are transferred from Kharkov. such as the 79th to 70th and the 1009th Motorized Regiments. The specific designations are as follows. The 69th Guards Motorized Infantry Division was originally the 138th Motorized Brigade and is subordinate to the 6th Army of the Leningrad Military Region. An enhanced battalion has been transferred from the Volchensk direction. The 272nd Motorized Infantry Regiment of the 47th Guards Tank Division was originally the 6th Tank Brigade and belongs to the 1st Guards Tank Army of the Moscow Military Region. A battalion has been transferred from the Volchensk direction. The 72nd Motorized Infantry Division and the 44th Army of the Leningrad Military Region, to which the 128th Motorized Brigade belongs, have transferred 3 battalions and so on from the Volchensk direction. In general, the Russian army is a combination of half elite forces and half mobilized armed forces. Among them, the 810th Guards Naval Infantry Brigade, in the form of guerrilla teams, engages in reconnaissance and competition with the advancing Ukrainian reconnaissance and harassment teams. However, this special warfare method cannot change the overall situation on the battlefield at present. The Russian army has not yet committed large-scale ground forces to launch a full-scale counterattack against the Ukrainian army that has entered the country. According to the theoretical establishment of fully staffed and equipped 10 battalion-sized combat groups, calculated at 1,000 to 1,200 people per battalion-sized combat group, it is only 10,000 to 12,000 people. This cannot form an advantage over the Ukrainian army. Not to mention that the actual strength is only 700 to 800 people. Various information indicates that the Russian army in Kursk currently seriously lacks heavy weapons, especially artillery. It is difficult to effectively resist the artillery firepower of the Ukrainian army. The Russian army in the Kursk region also lacks tanks. Since the Ukrainian army entered Kursk, it has only encountered 31 Russian tanks, most of which are old-fashioned T-62s and a small number of early models of T-72s. These Russian tanks have either been destroyed or captured by the Ukrainian army. Of course, among the captured tanks, there are also some with good performance, such as 3 T-80B VMS and 1 T-90M. The Ukrainian army immediately repainted the identification symbols on them and put them into use. The Russian aerospace forces dispatched intensively in the first 2 days and caused a certain degree of interference to the Ukrainian army. However, as the Ukrainian air defense operations extended forward, after 7 days, it would be very difficult for the aerospace forces to find an opportunity to attack the Ukrainian army in Kursk after several Su-34s were shot down. The aerospace forces gradually gave up the support mission and returned to the punch-in mode of long-range throwing of glide-guided bombs. The factors restricting the dispatch of the Russian aerospace forces are as follows. First, the Patriot air defense missile system that Ukraine has deployed in advance in Sumy Oblast can support an air defense CLE of 90 kilometers and prevent Russian aerospace forces fighter jets from flying over the skies of the Kursk Oblast front. In addition, the Ukrainian army may have put into use the newly acquired F-16 fighter jets, which work together with the AIM-120 medium-range air defense missile system. The AIM-120 is also a very intimidating presence for Russian-made fighter jets. However, since F-16 fighter jets and pilots are very precious, Ukraine did not allow the F-16 to cross the border for combat. Instead, it kept the F-16 patrolling over the Sumy Oblast controlled by itself and took on the mission of coordinating and protecting the forward-deployed ground-based Patriot air defense missile system. But Ukraine's own Su-27 and MiG-29 are much bolder in use. On the ground in Kursk Oblast, images of the Ukrainian Air Force's Su-27 making a low-altitude forward attack have been captured, while the modified MiG-29 mainly undertakes the task of ground attack on August 16. The Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter jet dropped a precision-guided bombs provided by France and successfully destroyed a bridge over the Seym River. However, on the same day, the Ukrainian Air Force admitted that a MiG-29 had crashed and the pilot was rescued after parachuting. This MiG-29 may have been shot down by Russian air defense firepower when attacking another bridge. But on the next day, when the Ukrainian army launched another attack, it severely damaged the target bridge. It can be seen that the Russian army has also played the strategy of using ground forces to control the air. Not only that, the Russian army also fully exploits the advantages of its unique Iskander ground-to-ground missiles and conducts using ground forces to counter ground forces and control the air. In recent days, the Russian side has frequently released drone videos showing the significant results achieved by the coordinated operations of drones and Iskander. Drones infiltrate over Sumy in advance. After finding the Ukrainian ground missile launch system, they quickly call for firepower to strike. With videos as evidence, the Russian side announced that it has successively destroyed two Patriot air defense missile launch vehicles, a set of European Iris-T medium-range air defense missiles and a HIMARS M270 tracked launcher that were covertly deployed by the Ukrainian army using forest belts. The Iskander short-range ground-to-ground tactical ballistic missile has the characteristics of high speed and timely response. It can be said that it can hit wherever it is pointed. However, the Ukrainian side also quickly released pre-taken photos to prove that at least that HIMARS is a fake target deliberately set up by them. However, it can be confirmed that the Ukrainian side has lost at least one Patriot air defense missile launcher. In this complex beast-fighting chess game, air defense missiles pose a deterrent and suppression to fighter jets, while ground-to-ground missiles seek opportunities to strike air defense missiles with the cooperation of drones to counter the Russian Iskander. Ukraine, which does not have ballistic missiles at hand, took the opportunity to ask the United States to provide JASSM Air-2 ground missiles and release the permission to use them on Russian territory. The United States has agreed in principle, but it will still take some time from provision to arrival and then to the formation of combat effectiveness. However, at present, on the Sumy-Kursk front where Ukraine concentrates technical weapons, the combination of air control by F-16, air defense by Patriot and strike by HIMARS is already enough to put the Russian army in a difficult situation at the beginning of Ukraine's Kursk offensive. A mobilized battalion of the Russian army was carried by 20 large trucks with infantry rushing to reinforce. On the evening of August 9th, the Ukrainian army decisively launched a salvo of HIMARS rocket launchers. In this way, a Russian battalion-level unit was wiped out. Now, the scale of Ukrainian forces, offensive means, campaign goals and specific plans have basically been ascertained. The troops mobilized include the 22nd Mechanized Brigade, the 61st Mechanized Brigade, the 80th Air Assault Brigade, the 88th Mechanized Brigade, the 116th Mechanized Brigade and the 103rd Territorial Defense Brigade. The first 5 brigades are all mechanized forces. However, not all of these brigades participate in the battle. Instead, they are committed to the battle in battalion-sized units. In the lenses of photojournalist S. Ukrainian tanks and infantry fighting vehicles are advancing swaggeringly along the highway in Russian territory without worrying about being attacked by Russian air and ground forces. This shows that the Ukrainian army has generally grasped air supremacy and ground firepower superiority on the Kursk front. The Ukrainian army even dispatched the 2 S-7 203mm heavy, self-propelled artillery of the 43rd Artillery Brigade to enter Kursk Oblast. This brigade is the most important artillery brigade of the Ukrainian army. Such a relatively bulky heavy self-propelled artillery can march into Russian territory along the highway. This fully shows that the air defense and air control combination composed of F-16 and Patriot can already support air supremacy for the Ukrainian army in the local battlefield. As for the losses of the Ukrainian army, there is currently visual evidence indicating that the armored losses do not exceed 10 vehicles, and they are all old Russian equipment. More crucially, the Ukrainian army's offensive in the Kursk region has not stopped and the area is still expanding. As of August 18, in the directions of Balaya and Velikaya Soly in the east of Suja, the Russian army is unable to maintain the existing defense line and has begun to retreat. Kromsky Vyki to the north has been semi-surrounded by the Ukrainian army. To the northwest, the Ukrainian army has completely surrounded Koronivio, and Koronivio has disappeared from the battle report list of the Russian Ministry of Defense. These two directions are key directions. But currently there is very little information such as the troops and designations invested by both sides in these two directions. There are still 20 kilometers from the current front line to Lgov and Rilsk. In the future, this place will inevitably become the focus of contention between the two sides. In the GLS-HK Overvy district on the Western Front, due to the severely damaged bridges, the Russian army cannot even reinforce in time. So this area is currently being pushed flat by the Ukrainian army. And it is only a matter of time before it is occupied by the Ukrainian army at present. The Kursk nuclear power plant is already within the strike range of the Ukrainian army's long-range firepower. Satellite photos show that the Russian army has begun to dig trenches in the area between Lgov and the Kursk nuclear power plant. And the trenches in some areas have been completed due to the obvious shortage of Russian troops. They still cannot stop the advance of the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army has deployed air defense forces, artillery forces, special equipment and logistical support units to Kursk in advance. Ukrainian military personnel revealed that the 95th Ukrainian Air Assault Brigade has currently arrived at the border of Sumy, and Ukrainian fighter jets have also begun to operate deep in the Kursk region. The Ukrainian army seems to want to turn the Kursk region into a bridgehead for counterattacking the Russian mainland to seek greater results. In short, Ukraine's Kursk offensive captured 200 square kilometers of Russian territory in 12 days. This progress is 40 times faster than Russia's progress of 600 to 800 square kilometers in Ukraine in a year. Of course, this is also a result achieved by taking advantage of a big loophole at present. The Russian army's offensive in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine is still ongoing, presenting a situation of you fight yours and I fight mine. Except for the areas of Kupia NSK and Krmnaya in the Kharkiv-Luhansk direction, where the Russian army's offensive has significantly contracted due to troop transfers. The Donetsk front line covers for battle zones from north to south, Bakhmut, Tortsk, Donetsk, and Vuoldar. The Russian army is focusing on attacking Tortsk, and secondly launching an attack on Avdiivka in the direction of Donetsk. In the past 2 years, the Russian army has been adopting a strategy of building strong fortifications and fighting dull battles in eastern Ukraine, relying on small teams of infantry and drones to charge repeatedly. It has gradually eroded Ukraine's defensive positions and engaged in a long and bloody war of attrition. Although Ukraine has always maintained an exchange ratio of more than twice or even 3 times against the Russian army. After all, Ukraine is relatively small in size. Even with an exchange ratio of 3 or 5 times, Ukraine cannot bear such a long-term consumption battle. However, with the entry of F-16 fighter jets, Ukraine immediately changed its tactics and directly attacked Russia's relatively soft underbelly. A war strategy of turning from interior lines to exterior lines is changing the basic face of the Russia-Ukraine war. Is the Russian army willing to give up its advantage in Donbas in exchange for the safety of Kursk? Judging from the current situation, the Kremlin and the Russian Ministry of Defense seem reluctant. However, The Russian army's offensive in Donbas has significantly slowed down the Ukrainian army in the direction of Donetsk said that since the battle in Kursk started. The Russian army's offensive momentum has decreased by more than 15%. This means that the Russian army has also begun to transfer troops and firepower from the direction of Donbas to Kursk. So, what actions will the two sides take in the next bigger game in Kursk and globally? This is the key point that should be paid attention to.